Chapter 9 is Cognitive Development in the Preschool Years. There is so much going on intellectually in early childhood, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds. But preschoolers, they are so curious, and their imagination and creativity are expanding exponentially. Their language is increasing very quickly, and they're starting to look at the world and question and think in ways they haven't before. We talked about the 0 to 2-year-olds as far as Piaget. That was the sensory motor stage, and now we are in the pre-operational stage. This is the stage where kids start to have a lot of symbolic thinking, a lot of reasoning. They start to understand concepts. There's a lot of creative play. This is the age of magical thinking. They believe in a lot of things when you think about things from magic and fairies and Santa Claus and Tooth Fairy, including things like going to Disney World and everything being real. But that also means they believe that the monster in the closet is real as well. So a lot of that pretend play is coming out at this age. This is from 2 to 7 years old. So during this stage we have a lot of new things going on, but we're not yet logical. During this stage, symbolic function is important. And symbolic function is when they can really think about playing pretend, that a mental symbol, a word, an object, a toy, something that's not actually there, is something they can pretend. So maybe they saw somebody playing with a baby previously, and now they're using their doll and pretending it's a baby. Or they saw cars driving on the road, and now they are using a toy car. So it's that pretending of things that might not actually be physically present. There's a strong relationship between our use of language and our thinking until we can express it. Once we can express ourselves with language, we now have a past tense, a present tense, and a future tense. Although it's sort of funny if you talk to really young kids and you say, "Oh, when did you go to the mall?" and they'll tell you, "Oh, I went tomorrow." So their sense of time isn't yet solid, but they do now have that understanding to be able to describe in the past, present, and future. Language gives a lot of power to kids to learn. Centration is what you see, is it what you think? Centration is when you can concentrate on one limited aspect of a stimulus, ignoring other aspects. So they're not paying attention to things that actually might be quite relevant. And centration is directly related to conservation. And conservation is understanding that quantity is not related to the arrangement of objects. So what does that all mean? Well, let's talk about an example that many of you may have seen or heard. And this is one of the things you'll be doing on our field trip. So this is one of Piaget's conservation tasks. So you show children 2 glasses of water the same size. We'll be doing it slightly differently, but you pour one of the glasses into a different shaped glass, and then you ask the children, okay, so here you say, are these 2 the same amount? And they'll probably say, yes, they are. And then you look over here. Now, we as adults, with that knowledge that we have, know that yes, it didn't, just because the shape of the cylinder changed does not necessarily mean that the quantity of the liquid inside changed. But younger children will definitely look at this, or many of them up to a certain age, according to Piaget, will look at this and say, oh, there's definitely more in here. And then if you asked why, they'd probably tell you because it was taller. So we will, please remind me in class, and I'll show you some videos of children doing some of these tasks. And then on the field trip, we will also, hopefully, you'll get to see some interesting differences in responses on these kinds of tasks. So this is from your textbook. It's on page 222, and it just looks at different kinds of conservation tasks, and centration also comes into this. So they look at number of elements and changing how close together they are, and we'll do some of that on the field trip as well. And it says, most research shows by 6 or 7 years old, children grasp that one. It will also take a ball of Play-Doh, change the shape, and altering the shape, usually by 7 or 8 years old. Kids have established conservation and understand the centration with that as well. Length by 7 or 8 years old, area by 8 or 9, weight by 9 or 10. And it's interesting because volume displacing in water, which we will not do with the kids, they are saying up until about 14 or 15 years old, some kids do not establish an understanding of that piece of conservation. Transformation is the process of something changing from one state to another. Children in the pre-operational stage have a hard time understanding that. I always think of children, you should have them draw a map, figure out how to get somewhere, and then figure out how to get back. My kids used to put a cup filled with water in the freezer to watch it turn into ice, and then they'd want, the next day it would be ice, and they'd want to take the cup back out in the morning and leave it out for the day, so they'd have the ice to play with in the afternoon. And the understanding of that it's a long process and it's not an immediate transformation. So here they show pre-operational child's view. When you drop a pencil, what happens? So they know it starts in the standing position and then it ends up in the laying down position. But an adult understands that in order to get from here to here, it has to also stop here and here and here and here and all the way down in order for that to work. Young children are egocentric. What does that mean? It means that they don't understand other people's viewpoints. They don't think about taking those into account. So they see only from their own perspective, unaware that other people might have different views than they do on things. And we'll do some things on the field trip on this as well. One of the things we will talk about in our next class is with egocentrism, and please remind me, I'll show you a video, and what they do is this Piagetian mountain task, and so the boy is supposed to try to answer questions as far as what the clown or what the other person can see, so it's usually done with two people, but trying to imagine seeing from somebody else's perspective, and children have a really hard time with that, and even if you explain it, tend to have a hard time understanding it. In the pre-operational stage, especially later in the stage, children have a lot of intuitive thought. And if we think about little kids and they're always saying, why is the grass green? Why is the sky blue? And then when they hear even a partial answer, they assume they know everything there is to know about that. So in the book they talk about children think an airplane can fly because they've seen the wings move up and down like a bird. So they will assume that's why an airplane can fly, because it has wings that move up and down like a bird. So just hearing one little piece of information, they think they understand a lot more than they actually do. So they call it primitive reasoning. As we go through the different theories and theorists, I think we had talked about this previously, there's a lot of people who say, yes, this theorist knew what he was talking about, and there's other people who say, yeah, but. So there's always the critics. So some people think, well, okay, he kind of may have known what he was talking about, but maybe kids can do things earlier than he thought they could. He also focused a lot on the lack of logic and on the negative. So we have what they couldn't do yet. They don't have conservation yet. They don't have object permanence yet. They have not established centration. So in more recent research, a lot of theorists are saying, well, it looks like some preschoolers may be more capable than Piaget may have originally thought. Memory. Memory in general is very susceptible to suggestion, and children even more so. You can actually get a child to answer something because maybe they think they want to give you the answers they think you want to hear, because children often want to please other people, or it could be that they heard something over and over again, or it was asked in a certain way that actually has an influence on their memory and how they remember something happening. In your book on page 227, there's a little chart that talks about some suggested ways to question children in the courtroom if it's necessary, like playing dumb, asking follow-up questions, being open-ended, having them describe, but without asking leading questions. And it's really important that you're not making them feel like you're looking for a certain answer, or that they're going to be rewarded, or that you're going to punish or disapprove depending on what their answer is. And that you don't want to be the one to describe the event. You want them to do as much of the describing as possible in an open-ended way. When we talk about the information processing approach to cognitive development, we're looking at how children think and how they approach problems, what their mental programs are. It's considered the dominant, most comprehensive, and most accurate explanation of how children develop cognitively. Well, what does that mean? Well, as preschoolers, as they get older and as their brain develops more, they get longer attention spans. So because of that, that means that they're going to be able to take in more for longer periods of time. When you think about the conservation tasks, they're going to be able to pay more attention to the details. So it's possible, when you look from this perspective, that there's other reasons for why things happen, kind of looking from a different angle than Piaget. Theories now show that preschoolers probably have a lot more understanding of numbers than Piaget originally thought. Children can tend to count in a more systematic manner than than Piaget previously thought. They also, even if they count incorrectly, they often tend to have better one-to-one correspondence than was previously thought. So even if they count 1, 3, 7, 9, they may be putting their finger on one item to go along with each of those numbers, which shows a slightly higher understanding of numbers than previously thought. By the age of 4, most preschoolers can do very simple addition and subtraction, not on paper, not thinking, with the mathematical symbols, but in an out loud way, especially when it's presented in a concrete way with objects. Autobiographical memory is memories of our own life, memories from our own perspective. And prior to the age of 3, most research shows that we don't actually have solid memories, concrete memories prior to the age of 3. But most young children by the age of 3, when asked questions, especially questions that are open-ended where they can answer with their own perspective, that they tend to have a pretty good sense of their own memory, especially if it's an event that happened more than once, so that it's set in their memory. They may think of a specific time they went to, say they go to a restaurant on a regular basis, they go to the same restaurant. They might remember the events as if it's one occasion, even because they've done it so many different times. Scripts, broad representations of memory, in memory of events and the order in which they occurred. What does that mean? Well, as I was saying about the restaurant, there could be if every week your family goes to Fridays, personal example, and every Friday you go to Fridays, the waitress comes, passes out the menus, you order, maybe they bring bread to the table, and you've done this many times. So if you asked a child to describe the events, they might describe some events from different times you went and kind of string them together as if they were one example, just because of the way life works, where there's a lot of repetition in the events and things that we do. Lev Vygotsky lived around the same time as Piaget, but he lived in Russia at the time, and he was a lawyer, and so his work wasn't translated to English, and he wasn't taken as a serious child developmentalist until later on. It was actually after his death when his work started to get some attention. So Vygotsky talked about the zone of proximal development and scaffolding. The zone of proximal development looks at what a child can almost but not quite do on his own, but can do with some help. And scaffolding is that assistance that the child would get from another person. So what does that mean? Let's talk about it. So here we have the zone of proximal development. What we looks at is what a child can do here, and the zone of proximal development without help would be what a child can do on their own, between nothing and what they can do on their own. And then over here we have unaided and aided. It shows that when a child gets assistance, oh wait a minute, here's what they could have done on their own, right? But then with that help, they could go all the way to here. We had talked in class, I don't know if I did this in both sections, but I had someone come up to the front of the room, and I talked about how a child, when you put your finger on the knot as a child's learning how to tie their shoe, the finger on the knot is the scaffolding, and the difference in how long their shoe can stay tied and how well they can tie their shoes is the zone of proximal development. So here's a couple more examples. We have if you think about the teacher's role, if you think about this child over here trying to reach an apple, and the teacher's role is to be that step stool to get them to the point where they can accomplish what they need to, or holding your hand, with learning to write, or on a bicycle, learning to read, stacking blocks. Any of these activities are good examples. Most of the research on Vygotsky's works tends to show it as pretty positive and accurate and consistent with what's out there and with current research. This chart's in your book on page 230, and it just looks at some concepts comparing Piaget, the information processing approach, and Vygotsky, and it looks at the key concepts of what's important. And you'll see with Vygotsky it's a lot about culture, and with Piaget it's a lot about stages, and so that's one of the major differences. There is a language explosion when we get into the early childhood years. When we talk about syntax is how we put our words together to make sense. And by 3 years old, they're pretty accurate with a lot of different combinations. This chart is in your book. It's on page 232. You might take some time to look at it, the differences in language in a year. Fast mapping is when we have a very quick exposure to a word and we quickly understand what to do with it. For example, it says this is a wug, and we quickly figure out, oh, if that's one wug, then we know that this is 2 wugs. Grammar talks about the system of rules that govern how we express our language. private speech is speech intended for the self, not for others, and young children use a lot of private speech. Someone please make sure we talk about that in class, next class. This chart's important. It talks about the quantity of language differences in homes from professional, working, and welfare families. Please take the time in your book to read on page 233. You want to read about the Hart and Risley study and how language development is affected by poverty. It's a really serious issue. Please take the time to read that section. Preschool is a vital piece of education that is becoming more and more important. This chart looks at what's important in early child care.